The morning sun streamed through the window of my kitchen. The light filled the room slowly, dancing with the dust particles on the glass. Yet, despite this peaceful scene, there was something strange inside me. Elliot, the man I'd known for years, the one I'd spent the early days of my marriage with, was preparing my morning coffee again. But something was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but it was clear something was off. Elliot was silent in the kitchen. Normally, he'd joke with me or tell me something while making coffee. But today, he said nothing. Instead, the monotonous hum of the coffee machine was the only sound echoing in the kitchen. In that moment, a fleeting unease gripped me. I approached him slowly. "You made my coffee again today," I said, trying to feel normal. Elliot looked at me with that calm smile of his, but there was something in his eyes. A kind of distance, as if he were hiding something from me. For just a moment, he met my gaze, then handed me the coffee cup. "For you, Adelina. I wanted to do something different today," he said, his voice cold and ordinary. But the alarm bells in my head went off. I wasn't unfamiliar with anything about this morning, but the smell of that coffee, it was different. My eyes drifted to the cup. Coffee was much darker than I was used to, with a thin layer of steam rising from it. But the most unsettling thing was the scent that hit my nose. A faint metallic smell, oddly intense, reached me. For a moment, I wanted to turn and look at him, but the fear in my eyes was hidden. Elliot stepped toward me, looking into my eyes. "What do you think? Will you like the taste?" he asked, the strange calm in his voice startling me. Something wasn't right, but the excitement of that early morning moment held me back. Till I took the cup. Slowly, carefully, I took a sip. For an instant, everything seemed to stop. Right after the sip, an unease began in my stomach. That metallic taste echoed on my tongue and in my nose. I closed my eyes slowly, trying to figure out what was happening. Normally, coffee, especially the way Elliot made it, was smooth, rich, and warm. But this carried something strange. "Elliot," I said, my voice trailing off. "What's in this?" Elliot looked at me with an indifferent expression in his eyes and gave a slight smile. "I made it special for you," he said. "A little different, maybe a deeper flavor." In that moment, something broke inside me. As my eyes drifted to the cup, my mind was screaming. What was in this coffee? What was happening? I shouldn't drink this. But in that instant, one thing echoed in my mind: Elliot. His words made it seem like I could drink it so easily. But I knew what I felt. There was a tension trembling within me. As something approached, I instinctively pulled back. For just a moment, I thought something was wrong. But then that thought quickly faded. Elliot looking at me with that calm yet unfamiliar smile stirred something strange inside me. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend I didn't notice. I smiled as usual and took another sip of my coffee. I began moving slowly around the table. Cup was still in my hand, but the tightening in my stomach was growing stronger. I have to do this. This isn't ordinary. In an instant, I made my decision and stood up quickly. "I have a phone call to make. I'll be right back," I said, my trembling hands placing the cup back down. Elliot looked into my eyes and took a deep breath. "Of course, Adelina. I'm here if you need anything," he said, but the odd confidence in his voice worried me. I hurried out of the kitchen and headed to the study. I was expecting something. He was watching me, I knew it. In that moment, I felt like everything needed to unravel quickly. I closed the door and stepped inside. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:12. I had a feeling something was tied to time. I should take another sip. What was this coffee really? But there was a game in everything. My thoughts raced so fast that I couldn't decide what to do. I just had to wait and watch. In the study, with every second my suspicion grew, my hands still trembling. I thought this morning might be the most important one of my life. Was there anyone who couldn't see the tension in Elliot's eyes? But I could. The truth was becoming clearer with every passing second. In that moment, tasting the coffee might be the key to solving all these question marks. This morning had started with just a sip, but now I had to turn everything upside down to find out what was inside it. In the study, I was trapped between the pale light filtering through the window and the dark corners of the room. My hands were still trembling. Coffee, with the terrifying sensation it left in my stomach, was spreading through every cell of my body. I had taken another sip, but the unease inside me was growing. For a moment, my thoughts raced, chasing each other in my mind. Why would he do something like this? Why tamper with my coffee? Elliot's eyes kept swirling in my head. That calm look, that untrustworthy smile. The clock read 9:23. Ticking of the clock made my heart race faster with every passing second. Something was definitely wrong. Elliot's behavior over the past few days had left countless question marks in my mind. A week ago, the weekend we spent at his family's house had been strange. Everything had suddenly turned odd. After breakfast, the nausea had started. Elliot had always brushed it off, saying, "Maybe eating late didn't agree with you." But somehow there was something he was covering up. I took a deep breath and leaned against the edge of the desk. I picked up my phone again, but there was nothing in my messages. No secret note from Elliot. Or maybe I hadn't noticed. I examined my phone a bit more, but I couldn't find anything. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I whipped my head around. With the suspicions awakening in my mind, I quickly approached the door. As I opened it, he immediately noticed the worry in my eyes. "Elliot," I said, my voice faltering as I took a deep breath. He stood there, hands in his pockets, as calm as he'd been that morning. That cold smile was on his face again. But this time I looked more closely. There was something in his eyes. A coldness I'd never seen before, a distance. "Did you forget something?" I asked, gripping the phone in my hand tightly. "No, I just wanted to check on you," he said. "I put extra care into this morning for you. Didn't you like the coffee?" I could sense something hidden behind the innocence in his voice. I couldn't hide the fear in my eyes any longer. "Elliot," I said, my voice trembling. "That coffee. Why did it smell like that? Is there something in it?" For a moment, the smile on his face faded. His eyes flashed with something unfamiliar for just a few seconds. But then he quickly returned to his usual calm demeanor. "There's no need to worry about me, Adelina," he said. "I just wanted to do something different for you. To change things. Just for you." Every word he spoke fueled the fear growing inside me. He was so close, as if he were ready to approach me at any moment. "Elliot, I feel something," I said, forcing the words out. "Did you really do this for me? But I couldn't finish my sentence. Elliot took another step and stood beside me. The deep darkness in his eyes seemed eager to pull me in. In that brief silence, everything felt even darker. "Elliot," I said, my voice trembling more noticeably. "What are you planning? Why are you doing this?" For a moment, it seemed as though the fear in my eyes and all the doubts racing through my mind had briefly affected him. But then his eyes met mine again with that cold confidence. "Think of it as a kind of surprise. Adelina, everything is for your own good. Everything will be better," he said. "Just wait a little longer." Really? There seemed to be a threat lurking behind his words, but I couldn't voice it. His ability to remain so calm and composed was raising 1,000 questions in my mind. But something was missing. Something was blatantly obvious, yet it wasn't easy to figure out what. Elliot took a few steps toward me. He pulled something from his pocket and handed it to me. An envelope. In the tense atmosphere of this morning, taking that envelope felt like accepting that everything would change. My hands trembled as I held it. "What's this?" I said, opening the envelope and pulling out the paper inside. In that moment, my heart began to pound rapidly. My name was written on it, and the words just below it read, "We'll be with you forever, Adelina." This is just the beginning. As the paper slipped from my hands, everything turned into an unsolvable puzzle. Elliot's gaze remained calm and distant, but the meaning behind it overshadowed everything. I didn't know what to do after reading it. But one thing was clear: this was a warning. And I realized my time was starting to run out. Now I had to wait and act when the right moment came. But this time I knew what I was up against. I'd have to wait longer to uncover it all. I placed the envelope on the table, my hands still trembling. My eyes reread those two words written on it: "We'll be with you forever, Adelina." A sudden dizziness washed over me. I was waiting for everything to fall perfectly into place to decipher the meaning of this message, but there were so many questions. I realized how terrified I'd been this morning. Elliot's calmness felt like the prelude to something. "Elliot, you keep saying everything's fine, but," I began, my voice shaking. "Why did you give this to me?" "What do you mean?" "I just want an explanation, because this could mean something else entirely." Elliot looked at me without averting his gaze. In the depths of his eyes, there was always a coldness I didn't fully understand. But at that moment, I didn't even have the courage to look too closely, 'cause the meaning in those eyes felt so foreign to me. I forced myself to understand them, but the fear inside me was overwhelming. A doubt began to surface. Maybe there was something in those eyes, but I didn't want to see it. "Adelina, you know everything is to protect you," he said in that same composed tone. "Sometimes change is necessary. Sometimes things we don't notice come together and we let them. Then everything falls into place." Each word was like a clue, but not a clear one. He wanted to silence me, to make me listen. I felt there was something more at the end of those sentences, but what? What was he trying to say? Just a week ago, I'd believed I had a happy life with this man. But now everything was different. Over such a long time, everything I'd shared with Elliot felt hollowed out. His making coffee in the mornings, subtly adding these strange touches, now carried more meaning. Was it all part of a plan? A momentary silence fell. It was so quiet I could almost hear my own breathing. Elliot walked toward the window across the room without saying a word. In that moment, a thought flickered in my mind. "Elliot," I said, summoning my courage, "I've noticed something about you. Lately, you've been acting strange. You're spending more time with your family. You've been with Nina more often. Why?" Elliot continued staring out the window, but there was no change in his eyes. He just became a little more attentive, as if he were prepared for anything at any moment. "Yes, I've been spending more time with Nina," he said. "But I didn't think I was neglecting you when I was with you. I don't think it's something bad for you." With his cold, simple response, the darkness inside me deepened further. Every word felt like a shield. There was another meaning behind what he said, but in that moment I couldn't grasp it. My eyes studied his face. Why did he seem so calm? Why was he reassuring me like this? 'Cause I had to trust him. Didn't I? "Elliot," I said, this time with a harsher tone. "There's something. There's definitely something. I feel everything changing. Why won't you tell me the truth?" That moment, Elliot turned slowly and walked toward me. His steps seemed to signal that things were getting more serious. Suddenly, a void opened inside me. Even though this man kept saying everything was fine, the feeling inside me told a different story. Adelina, I realized something while making your coffee this morning. Sometimes a person needs to make peace with their past, he said, quickening his steps as he approached me. But I did this for you. 'Cause I love you. I've always said that. I just want everything we've been through together to be for you. What do you mean? I asked, but I didn't understand his words. Was he preparing to leave me? Could this be a simple goodbye? In that instant, everything in the room blurred. It was so chaotic that every thought in my mind tangled together. Change Elliot was making me feel burned through me like something strange. But he was definitely hiding something. And now I was ready to do anything to find out what that was. I had to tell you this, Adelina, he said, a glint appearing in his eyes. The truth can be heavy sometimes, but you need to know it. I still didn't understand. Something was very close. Something was about to be revealed. But this time, no matter how close it was, I felt like I couldn't stop it. The cold confidence in Elliot's eyes had become even more pronounced now. His words, insisting that everything was fine, kept ringing in my ears. But the void inside me refused to fill. It was as if Elliot was hiding something. And I wouldn't find peace until I uncovered that hidden truth. My eyes caught the envelope still resting on the table. We'll be with you forever, Adelina. Those two words changed the meaning of everything. Elliot was trying to explain something to me, but those explanations only raised more questions in my mind. Then tell me everything, Elliot, I said, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. That envelope you gave me this morning, was it just a joke? Are you trying to scare me? Elliot hesitated for a moment, his eyes briefly darting away from mine. But then they snapped back, as if he knew he couldn't afford to waver on this. Adelina, I want to do everything for you. I've told you that, haven't I? But sometimes life moves in ways we don't expect, he said. There was a mystery in every word. But something had shifted for him too. In that moment, I realized something. Elliot was trying to tell me something. And that telling felt like a confession. I took a step back, the fear in my heart growing larger. Elliot's behavior felt foreign to me. I was struggling to understand why a man so familiar could act so cold and distant. Why have you pulled away so much? I said, finally voicing the question I'd been afraid to ask. Why has everything changed? Why won't you tell me everything? I'm aware of something, Elliot. Something's different, and I need to know what it is. Elliot noticed the doubt in my eyes. For a fleeting moment, something flashed in his gaze, perhaps guilt. But then he slipped back into that familiar cold expression. Adelina, please, he said, his voice sharper this time. Sometimes a person carries things from their past and has to let them go in some way. No matter how much time has passed, change is necessary. But if I must tell you something, it's all for your own good. Always for you. Those words filled me with even deeper suspicion. The old confidence was still on Elliot's face, but it was becoming easier to sense the contradictions lurking beneath it. I shook my head slowly. I no longer knew what I should do. Something hadn't been said. There was a secret, and it didn't belong to me. I just want an answer, Elliot, I said, suppressing the voice rising within me. Why are you really doing this to me? Why has everything changed? Why are you so close to Nina? Why does it feel like your trust in me has almost completely vanished? Elliot took a deep breath. It was as if he were searching for the right words but couldn't find them. Finally, he took a few more steps toward me. In that moment, I almost forced myself to step closer and ask more questions. But then I noticed something. This man was now even more of a stranger to me. Adelina, he said, his voice softer this time but more resolute. I have to explain this to you. But sometimes even explanations aren't enough. It'll be hard to earn your trust. But once upon a time, things were so different, don't you remember? Every word was a clue. To figure out why this man was treating me so coldly, I needed to learn more about his past. Elliot, you owe me an explanation about this, I said, feeling the determination in my eyes. You're hiding something. I know it. But if you truly trust me, then you need to tell me everything. Elliot gave me one last look and nodded. Maybe one day, he said, the slowness in his voice hinting that something would change. But until that day comes, you'll have to wait. Everything has its time. We stood in silence for a while. Confusion inside me kept growing. The coffee he'd given me that morning now felt entirely different. Even back then, I'd sensed something was starting to go wrong. But now I felt it was all so much deeper. I had to do something. I had to uncover the truth. No matter how much this tension tore me apart, I now knew there was something else in Elliot's eyes. That secret would come to light somehow, and I had to find it out. This wasn't just a question anymore. It was something I needed to survive. That night, the sleepless hours wore my mind down even further. I tossed and turned in the darkness of my bedroom, losing myself more with every passing second, every minute. Elliot's words echoed in my head, but I couldn't figure out what they meant. Why was he trying so hard to hide something? Why wouldn't he tell me everything? Morning came. As the sun crept into my room with a faint reddish light around the window's edge, the darkness inside me still hadn't lifted. Elliot hadn't woken up yet. I hadn't slept a wink until that morning hour, but the suspicions in my eyes were growing. Every move he made, every word he spoke, had now turned into a riddle. His watching me, his reluctance to explain, it all felt like something was being covered up. My eyes turned toward the kitchen. That coffee. I didn't want to revisit the feeling I'd had while he prepared it, but it was the beginning of everything. The smell of that coffee. That scent was still in my nose. I was alone in the kitchen. Elliot was still asleep. But in the early hours of the morning, when I woke up with a strange unease and found myself in the kitchen, I noticed something. My phone had been left on the table in a way it usually wasn't. Despite how careful I'd been, I was only now realizing why I needed to be so cautious. Elliot's phone had displayed a message from work. But unfortunately, the message had been deleted. My lips trembled as I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the screen. Maybe the messages were just a coincidence. But the deep fear in my heart grew with every passing second. I quickly left the room and placed my phone back on the table. I felt like I had to pursue something. All the voices inside me were telling me I needed to confront him. No matter what, Elliot had to tell me the truth. Pushing my anxiety aside, I hurried to the study. That moment, footsteps from the kitchen followed me quickly. Elliot had woken up. My vision darkened and my heart started pounding. I slowly opened the door. Elliot was inside. He noticed the obvious fear in my eyes, but he remained composed. It was as if he knew I was chasing something. "Adelina," he said, his voice much harsher than usual. "What are you doing here?" I took a few steps and stood in front of him. "I saw something on my phone screen," I said without lowering my head. "You deleted messages, didn't you?" "Why?" Elliot fell silent for a moment. But that silence was unnerving, as if he knew he had to say more. When I saw the rigid expression in his eyes, I realized how right I'd been. "Adelina, I have to explain something," he said. "But first, you need to accept something." My entire body tensed. Elliot's eyes weren't looking at me the way I'd always known them to. This felt like a goodbye. "What do I need to accept?" I said, my lips dry. Elliot took a slow, deep breath. In that moment, it felt like everything was coming to an end. "I'll tell you everything," he said. "But first, give me a chance. This is just for you, always for you." "Elliot," I said more firmly, "what are you planning to do to me? What are you doing?" Elliot noticed the fear in my eyes and quickly took a few steps toward me. But in that moment, I noticed something else. He stepped further inside. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of unraveling, as if this were the end of everything. "Then tell me everything," I said, feeling the determination in my eyes. Elliot paused for a moment. But then, with what he said next, I got the answers to all my suspicions. "I loved you once, Adelina. But I lost you," he said. "Then everything changed. And I started getting closer to Nina. I stepped back slowly. I was in shock. One knot in my mind unraveled, but others remained tangled." "What do you mean?" I said, my words catching in my throat. "Losing someone," Elliot said, a reflection escaping his eyes. "Sometimes when you find someone you've lost again, everything changes. This isn't just for you, it's true for all of us." In that moment, my suspicions surged toward him. There was something between Elliot and Nina, but what? A scream exploded inside me. And in that instant, I thought I'd found the answer to all my questions. Elliot's words had briefly illuminated the dark emotions inside me, but that light faded quickly. The shock in my eyes gave way to anger. The moment he said, I started getting closer to Nina. It was as if my heart skipped a beat. Everything seemed to unravel in an instant, yet there was still an unease within me. Digesting it, understanding it, was overwhelming. "What do you mean, Elliot?" I said, taking a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "How can you say this to me? Nina? So everything's changed that much in your eyes?" In that moment, there was something strange in Elliot's eyes. His expression wasn't the reassuring one I'd always known. He was looking at me like a stranger. Those composed gazes only fueled the anger growing inside me. "Adelina, I owe you an explanation for everything," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone attempting to explain. But there was something missing in his eyes. In that moment, I wanted to believe his explanation reflected the truth, but my doubts lingered. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "You're explaining things to me only when everything's been covered up, aren't you? You completely deceived me. You slowly lost me, Elliot." "Why?" I took another step back. That step felt like a breaking point. No matter what, I had to make him feel the determination in my eyes. This wasn't just about him, it was a reckoning with the truths inside me. Everything was so tangled that it felt like all the walls were about to come crashing down. Elliot took a step closer, locking eyes with me. "Adelina, I've explained everything to you. But it'll take time to resolve this. Maybe it'll never be resolved." In that moment, a voice inside me believed this explanation was part of a game. Elliot was still involved with Nina in some way, but what was it? Why was he so evasive about explaining? Why did he keep saying with time? "You're playing a game with me," I said, noticing the hardness in my voice. "When will you realize that? Your relationship with Nina came before everything else. And now you're trying to explain it all to me. But I understand what it means. Everything's changed for you, and I've just been left behind in the memories of your old self." Elliot froze for a moment. In that instant, there was a kind of lost look in his eyes. But then, regaining his composure, he said, "Yes, maybe everything has changed. But loving you wasn't that easy. It's hard to understand why it's so complicated. Can't just change everything so simply. But I always thought of you, always tried to protect you." In that moment, his words held no meaning. In his eyes, there was an expression of someone trying to justify himself. But I was beginning to feel everything. My suspicions were confirmed, yet I still didn't fully know the truth. Adelina, it's not easy to forget the things we've been through, Elliot said, stepping closer again. But there's an explanation for everything. My relationship with Nina took precedence over everything with you. But this is just a beginning. His words grew even more vague. Confronting him, dealing with these increasingly complicated emotions was becoming harder with every step. My skin prickled more with each move he made. Now I knew I had to take a step. But this time everything was different. Now everything had an end. I took another step back. In that moment, it felt like everything could shatter at once. I can't take this anymore, Elliot, I said without lowering my head. You have to tell me everything. Now or never. Elliot hesitated for a moment. But then I noticed there was no longer any indecision in his gaze. It was as if he'd finally resolved to reveal the truth. I have to tell you everything, Adelina, he said, his voice rising slowly. This is the beginning of something, maybe the end. But it's not about losing you. It's just a journey, and I want to include you in this journey. In that moment, something shifted. All the emotions inside me began to untangle in a complex way. And I was starting to realize everything. The truth doesn't always stay hidden, it finds a way to surface. This was my journey to uncover my truth. Elliot's words echoed in my mind as my heart continued to pound. With every passing second, I was sinking deeper into a dark void. I have to tell you everything, Adelina, he had said. But what was the truth? What truth was he hiding? Why was everything so complicated? Why couldn't he just give me a simple explanation? In that moment, I felt as if everything slowed down. The voices in my head weighed each word, trying to process them. Elliot stood before me, waiting to say something at any moment. But I felt a sense of danger with every breath, not knowing what I was about to hear. You have to do this, Adelina, Elliot said, the depth in his eyes making me feel as though they might swallow me whole for a moment. Sometimes accepting the truth can be the beginning of everything. His words felt like they were prying open the door to a secret. But no matter how wide that door opened, the idea of something dark emerging from it was terrifying. What was the truth? Did he really love me? Or was it all just a game? For a brief moment, I pushed aside all the thoughts clouding my mind and looked at him. In that instant, he could see all the fear, anger, and doubt in my eyes. But as I tried to understand what was happening, I noticed something. There was a kind of pain in his eyes. Contradicted everything he was saying. I hadn't seen that pain before. I'll tell you everything, he said, and I noticed a tremor in his voice. But first, you have to believe me. There's so much I want to tell you, Adelina. But it's not that easy. He took another step closer. It was as if his approach was a necessity to make me listen. But listen to what? Everything he said was eroding the trust one had left in him. My feelings toward him were becoming increasingly complicated. Listen to me, he said, his lips trembling slightly. My relationship with Nina, it was only to protect the moment I shared with you. But things got more complicated. What I felt for her was different, but I always thought of you. My relationship with Nina didn't completely change what I had with you. You need to know that. His words didn't feel like an explanation to me. How could they be explained, really? While everything with me was being swept under the rug, his sudden attempt to tell me the truth felt like there was a lie embedded in it all. What do you mean, Elliot? I said, my voice strained. What does this have to do with you? Why do you keep saying the same things? Me, Nina, someone else? How do they all connect? You need to explain this to me. Elliot paused for a moment, as if the words were stuck in his throat. But in that moment, I noticed something. The emptiness in his eyes showed me that not everything was real. Such a convoluted explanation only confused me more. Adelina, after everything we've been through, trusting you has become hard, he said. But I know that in the end, everything will be explained to you. If not for you, then I need to resolve this within myself. In that moment, my feelings grew even more tangled. As I tried to make sense of what I was hearing, something inside me became even more muddled. Elliot still claimed everything was fine. But deep down, I had a strong feeling that it was a lie. "Do you really trust me?" I asked. "If you're truly doing all this for me, then why are you telling me this? Why are you still so close to Nina?" That moment, I saw another crack in Elliot's eyes. His gaze reflected that I needed to realize something. But I didn't have the courage to take even a single step. "You have to trust me," he said, reaching his hands toward mine. "It's hard to feel all these things you're saying, but I don't want to lose you." We stood in silence for a while. Everything was like a piece of a puzzle, and that puzzle grew more complex with every passing second. Every word he spoke pushed me one step further back. There was a path to every truth now, but where would that path take me? "My relationship with Nina was a turning point," he said, the pain in his eyes becoming more pronounced. "But I was afraid of losing you. Everything got tangled, Adelina. Everything." Elliot's explanation wasn't an answer, it was a confession. In that moment, fear enveloped my entire body. I shook my head slowly. There was only one thing he needed to tell me now, what was really happening. But for everything to fully come to light, it would take time. And that time might be very near. The deep pain in Elliot's eyes made me question all my trust in him for a moment. That reflection in his gaze told me I needed to understand who the man I'd known for years truly was. Everything had become complicated, but there was one thing. A secret hiding in the shadows. That secret finally had to come to light. "Just tell me the truth," I said, trying to control the anger in my voice. "Elliot, it doesn't have to be this complicated. If you truly want to make our relationship valuable, you need to explain everything to me. You don't have to hide anything, not from Nina, not from anyone else." Elliot froze for a moment as he looked at me. His eyes darted as if searching for an escape, but he stopped. Understanding what he said, what he felt, grew harder with every passing second. "Adelina," he said, the indecision in his voice revealing the dilemma he was in. "I want to tell you everything, but I'm afraid of losing you as a result. I can't change the past. But there's something. For a moment, he got lost between those sentences. I still didn't fully know what it was, but there was something in his eyes. That something told me everything was being seen in a different light. Truth waited like a mysterious puzzle. "What happened?" I asked, stepping back, holding my breath. Did something happen with Nina? Or something else? A deeper darkness appeared in Elliot's eyes. The depth in his voice intoxicated me with a strange sense of truth. But this time, his gaze didn't avoid mine. Those eyes were almost struggling to give me the whole truth. "Yes, something happened," he said, and in that moment I realized there was no temporary resolution to this. But it's not just about losing someone and turning to someone else. My relationship with Nina felt like a mistake in understanding ours. Something went wrong, but in truth, I didn't betray anyone, Adelina. Hearing his words, all my emotions tangled together in an instant. I didn't know what I felt or thought anymore. Could betrayal be defined so simply? "Elliot, how can you say this to me?" I said, noticing the weakness in my voice. "The time I spent with you doesn't align with anything you're saying. How can I accept this as an explanation?" Elliot lowered his head, holding it with his hands, and stayed silent for a while. His entire body exuded exhaustion. That exhaustion, in fact, answered all my questions. Elliot had lost everything he'd once built with me. Those losses weren't filled with explanations, but with the emptiness in his heart. I love you, he said, taking another step toward me. But I have to face the past. My relationship with Nina showed me the mistakes I didn't make with you. I felt something for you, but I don't truly think I'm guilty. Somewhere along the way, I wanted to fill the void inside me. It was just a misunderstanding. But I love you, Adelina. Those words completely shattered the trust one had left. The idea that everything needed to be explained crumbled in a different way. Even if Elliot said he loved me in the end, it couldn't ease the pain inside me. Truth was always more complicated. If you love me, I said, a tear sliding down my cheek, then you need to tell me everything. What happened with Nina? And why didn't you tell me the truth all this time? What were you afraid of? Elliot looked at me with deep regret in his eyes. But that regret felt like the fear of losing me once again. Nothing happened with Nina, Adelina, he said, though his words carried a hint of disbelief. But I was wrong. There was a void inside me, kind of loneliness. And that loneliness caused me to lose you. It's hard to explain what I truly felt, but I'm trying to tell you everything. I realized how deeply his words cut into me. As Elliot tried to defend himself, he was attempting to explain the complex emotions within him. But that explanation only weakened my trust further. I stepped back slowly, trying to gather my emotions. It's hard to believe this anymore, I said. Then what was all the time we spent together? Was it really meaningful to you? Elliot watched me helplessly once more. I won't fix this, Adelina. But everything got lost within itself. It was just a mistake. I had to prepare you to tell you the truth. But it took time. In that moment, I knew everything needed to come to a resolution. Relationships are shaped by mistakes. But every mistake builds a wall. And tearing down that wall takes time. The regret in Elliot's eyes only made everything more complicated. I knew the truth had to fully surface now, but somehow believing him was becoming harder. Every word he spoke seemed like a different explanation to me. He had to do this, but something was still missing inside me. There were hundreds of questions in my mind, but unfortunately, the answers just wouldn't fall into place. Elliot took a deep breath, following my gaze. Adelina, I'm so sorry for everything, he said, his voice weary and fragile. But I really want to do everything to fix this. I should have told you. I was just afraid of losing you. Everything with you was a reflection of that. I wanted to change something, but it wasn't that easy. They were just words. There had to be something more behind everything he said. I needed to understand it somehow. Elliot, no matter how important what you're telling me now is, it doesn't mean anything to me anymore, I said, turning my head to hide the anger in my eyes. The promises you gave me, did I ever truly believe them? I can't figure out where we got lost. My words seemed to weigh heavily on him. Taking another step back, we stood in the silence of that darkness. My eyes were still fixed on him, but everything had frozen, just like it had a few minutes ago. Knowing what to do was incredibly difficult. After knowing this person for so many years, accepting that everything was suddenly different wasn't easy. Elliot shifted into defense mode. Everything changed, he said. But when I thought about losing you, I realized everything had meaning. I want you to forgive me, but I can give you more time. I'm truly sorry. In that moment, I noticed something. These sentences didn't feel like a deep confession. They were merely an attempt to defend himself. It was a move to evade responsibility. I needed more time to understand whether he truly felt the depth of his emotions or genuine regret. but that time was making me question how meaningful loving him still was. "It's not that simple," I said, deciding whether to share the evident emotion in my eyes with him. "Are you asking me to forget what you put me through? Is that really what you expect?" There was something for me, but everything feels unresolved. Elliot experienced another crack in his gaze. The depth in his voice was enough to make me realize we'd reached the end. For a moment, my heart looked at him with pity, but the more I thought about it, the more the pain grew. His words served only to show me what he'd lost and what he was trying to find, nothing more. A few seconds of silence passed. "We'll be with you forever," I said, recalling the words echoing in my mind. What did that mean? "You're telling me everything's resolved, but there's a gap between what you say and everything you've given me. When will that gap close, Elliot?" My words hit him hard. Something faded from his eyes, and no matter how much he tried to defend himself, he could feel how difficult it was for me to believe him. "We'll be with you forever," he said, a clear pain in his voice. Yes, I said those words. But everything's become so complicated. I don't know why it's been so hard to express myself. But losing you was the worst thing I could have done. The truth had fully surfaced, but the void inside me still hadn't filled. In that moment, trying to understand the person who was explaining everything felt like a transition. Truth was complex. Perhaps forgiving someone couldn't be as hard as the beginning of a relationship. But believing in him again, rebuilding that old trust, how possible was that? "Elliot," I said, "I want you to tell me everything. I know everything's changed, but you need to tell me the truth. And no matter what, we need to figure out how we can see each other. Because right now, I don't understand what's left after everything we've been through." He paused for a moment, locking his eyes on mine. "I want you to forgive me," he said, his voice broken and tired. "But I love you, Adelina. Truly, I'm afraid of losing you." It became an emotion too complex to put into words. What should I do? There was uncertainty in my steps. The lost look in my eyes made me question whether telling him everything would be a solution. "With time, can everything be resolved?" I asked finally. "With time, can I understand you?" Elliot shook his head with a hint of despair in his eyes. "I don't know that either, Adelina. But can we give it one more chance?" One more chance, maybe more time. In that moment, I realized something. Every chance we gave each other had to rest on a foundation of trust. And rebuilding that foundation might be the only thing needed to resolve everything. The silence hung heavy in every corner of the room. Our eyes were locked, but something was missing. Every word Elliot spoke unearthed the accumulated anger and disappointments from before. I thought about how easy it might be to dismiss the love I'd felt for him, the years of effort we'd put in. But those thoughts turned into a new fear slowly wrapping around my heart. What if I still loved him? Elliot took another step closer to me. With every movement, I could feel the void and brokenness within him. "Adelina, losing you was the biggest mistake I could have made," he said, the fragility in his voice affecting me deeply. "I take full responsibility for everything, but I want a chance to start over with you. Please give me one more chance." I took a slow, deep breath. Part of me couldn't believe what he was saying, while another part questioned whether I wanted to leave everything behind and start anew. My heart was filled with emotions that completely contradicted each other. Yes, I was emotionally attached to Elliot. But trust? That foundation of our years-long relationship, how solid was it now? "One more chance," I said, my voice trembling. "Elliot, I know I still love you. But everything's changed. How can I just forget our relationship, everything we've been through, and trust you again? No matter how hard I try, everything's become so complicated." Elliot looked at me with deep sorrow in his eyes. It was clear he was trying to convince me with his words, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Even though my heart wanted to return to him, my mind was still filled with doubts. His faithful explanations as he tried to win me back weren't enough to fully rebuild that trust. Elliot, no matter how much you love me, after all this time, losing trust is really hard, I said, weaving all my emotions into my words. I want to know the truth to understand you. But will doing that give me the same trust again? Elliot lowered his head, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. For a moment, it seemed he wanted to shed all that regret and disappointment. But it wouldn't be easy. You want to know the truth, don't you? He asked. Then I'll tell you everything. Everything, because I love you and I don't want to lose you. I didn't know what to do next. What he was saying felt more like a confession than an explanation. Elliot was the man I'd known for years, but this person seemed like someone new. The trust we'd once built together had collapsed in an instant, leaving only broken walls behind. Nina, I said, feeling the bitterness on my tongue as I suddenly brought up her name. Did you really get close to her? What happened during the time we were together? You need to tell me, Elliot. Elliot let out a deep sigh and turned his eyes back to me. Yes, I got close to her, he said, his voice hardening. But that closeness didn't mean it was to hurt what I had with you. At one point, talking to Nina felt like a kind of comfort when I felt lost. But it was the wrong path, and I realize that now. I'm truly sorry. In that moment, his words didn't quite feel like a full explanation. For a brief second, I longed for the time when I was lost and wished I'd chosen the right path instead of veering off course. For someone to make me feel this way after all this time, to take away the trust I'd felt, allowing that felt like betraying myself too. Are you really sorry, Elliot? I said, a tear sliding down my cheek. Really, after all these mistakes, is it even possible for me to accept you again? And then, in the end, choosing what's right. How do I manage that? Elliot looked at me with deep regret in his eyes and fell silent. In that moment, something slipped from his gaze. That regret enveloped my heart as he tried to reach out to me. But rebuilding everything on top of his remorse felt incredibly difficult. Adelina, I'm aware of everything, he said, the traces of lived experiences in his eyes. But to earn your trust again, I deserve every chance. I can give you one more chance, too. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't an end, it could be a beginning. We just needed to give each other more time to rebuild trust. But as hard as it might be, it was something we both had to accept. One more chance, I said, taking a deep breath. But it won't be easy, you know that, right? Rebuilding everything will take time. Do you accept that? Elliot nodded, a great hope shining in his eyes. Yes, he said. It'll take time, but I want to start over with you. And I deserve it. I locked my eyes on his. Doubts still lingered within me, but I had to take another step. We had to start over. For myself and for him. We remained silent for a while longer. The thoughts in my mind tangled together. Elliot's words were like a glimmer of hope, but there was also unease. Rebuilding everything placed a heavy burden on both of us. What would time bring us? Could I really give him another chance? The sincere regret in Elliot's eyes had given me a slight sense of trust, but that trust had cracked under the weight of years. Everything was so fragile. Would the deep wounds in my heart heal with time? Or would giving each other a second chance only bring more pain? Adelina, Elliot said, breaking the silence. I'm aware of everything it'll take to make this work. I know rebuilding your trust won't be easy. But I'm truly sorry, and in the end, I'm afraid of losing you. Giving you a chance, maybe that's the right thing for us. I could feel how much he regretted it and how much effort he was putting in through his words. But so much time had passed that I couldn't gauge how far we could truly go in trusting each other again. Was it possible to go back to the beginning, for everything to return to how it once was? Do you think time will fix everything, Elliot? I asked, looking into his eyes as he took a deep breath. It won't be that easy. Trust doesn't come back in an instant. But embarking on a journey with you, forgiving you, I still don't know if I truly want to do that. Elliot tilted his head slightly, looking at me. I know, Adelina, he said. Time might not be enough to heal everything, but my feelings for you haven't changed. I just don't want to lose you. I don't want to fill the void inside me with losing you. For a moment, we faced the indecision in my eyes. Everything was a mess, my love, my anger, my fear, all existing in the same place at once. On one side, there was the regret he offered me. On the other, the painful memories of the past. But I realized something. People make mistakes. Mistakes happen in relationships too, but when you truly love someone, you need to give forgiveness and a chance to start over a shot. I had to decide to give Elliot and myself a chance. We should try something, I said, suppressing the fear in my heart. But this is a chance. A real chance. If you truly want this, then we need to find a way. Elliot looked at me with a spark of hope in his eyes and took a slow step forward. Yes, Adelina, I want this. But I know everything needs to be rebuilt with you. Time has to be taken by us to start over. We stayed silent for a while longer. This wasn't an end, it had to be a beginning. A new beginning, a step we'd take together to rebuild trust. But it would only happen with the time we gave ourselves and each other. Elliot gently extended his hands. We can overcome anything together, he said. It'll be hard, but I want to start trusting you again. If you're ready, I'll be with you on this journey. Without taking my eyes off him, I took a deep breath. I had to make a decision. I knew accepting the chance Elliot was offering wouldn't be an easy path. But I took another step. A step toward him. This might be a turning point for us. A way to leave the painful parts of the past behind and look toward the future with hope. Elliot, I said slowly, let's start over together. But this can only happen if we fully trust each other again. If we can truly trust. Elliot nodded with a sense of peace in his eyes and smiled. I'll show you, Adelina. No matter what, we'll make it together. Starting over together depended solely on the passage of time and our ability to overcome the challenges ahead. This journey would be tough, but in the end, we'd emerge bound by a stronger connection. This had to be our new beginning. As the days passed, every moment we spent together became another test we overcame. Each morning, waking up together, rebuilding trust began with small steps. With every step, the same questions echoed in both our hearts. Could we truly trust each other again? Could we fall in love with each other once more? Every moment I spent with Adelina reminded me of how much we'd lost, how much could never be the same as it once was. But at the same time, I began to believe that each new day carried hope, a fresh start. Time might be the only thing that could help us overcome everything. One morning, as we had breakfast together, my eyes lingered on Adelina's face. In these quiet moments before us, the old unease was gone. Sharing that moment made me realize how much I needed her, how ready I was to trust her again, always. Adelina, I said, sipping my coffee. You know, I feel like everything's better with you. It's been so hard, but every moment we spend together feels more precious. Adelina smiled. The softness in her eyes was a sign of how we were reconnecting with each other. Elliot, she said, her voice filled with peace, we've earned this. The chance we've given each other, we need to rebuild it by learning from the mistakes of the past. Together, we can be stronger. But we can only get there with time. I nodded with determination in my eyes. Yes, this journey wouldn't be easy, but we were both ready for this new beginning. It would take time for everything to fully resolve, but our faith in each other and our love would be enough to rebuild the trust we'd lost. A year had passed. This year had been one of immense transformation for both of us. Though it was filled with difficult times, mistakes, and reminders of the past, in the end we were much stronger together. Our commitment to our relationship had solidified through patience and trust. We were writing a story that had begun anew, shaped by the chances we gave each other. One morning, as we prepared our coffee in the kitchen, I noticed the change we'd undergone. That morning, the smell of coffee brought me peace, and I felt everything falling into place. Adelina looked at me with that trust in her eyes. A year ago, if we'd known how fragile our trust was, we might have been doomed to chase something lost forever. But now we could trust each other in every sense. Together, we were strong. Elliot, stirring a coffee cup on the kitchen counter, suddenly looked into my eyes and smiled. "Starting over with you was the best decision of my life," he said. "We embarked on this journey together, believed in each other, and in the end, everything is coming together." Adelina responded with a sparkle in her eyes. "Mistakes, vulnerabilities, but every moment we've spent together holds value. We'll never lose this chance we've given each other, will we?" "No," I said, taking a step closer to her. "We've started trusting each other and we'll protect that. We'll face every challenge together. We'll overcome everything." In that moment, I thought everything should come to an end. But in reality, everything was just beginning. With time, we were shedding the burdens of the past and moving forward with a love that grew stronger as we gave to each other. Together, we would overcome anything. There was no longer a void in my heart, there was trust. And that trust was what we'd both been searching for. We had truly started over with each other. And this story was only just beginning.